Good morning again. Yeah, we do have little gremlins in the cameras. It's always a process going live like this, right? It just is. There's so many moving parts, right, to try and keep everything working together smoothly. So once again, good morning. I'm Susan Smith. My business name is Stitched by Susan. I'm a long arm quilter, particularly freehand. And this week I'm working on a custom quilt of my own. And I thought it would be fun to do much like what I did last week, just do some of this live and on camera. So it's not particularly a class. If all works, it's a much bigger project, and so we'll just have to see how all the cords and things work. But if it goes smoothly, I will keep a mic on all the time that I'm quilting, and I'm kind of a talker, so I'll talk through some of the things that I'm doing. So it's not a class, but I feel like you can probably pick up some tips. And at the very least, you'll just see the process of quilting a custom quilt from end to end and see me as I work through some decisions that I have to make and choices and so forth. So without further ado, oh no, I wanted to insert one more thing too. Last week, I did some edge to edge small projects. We're going to, okay. My husband, the producer, is just giving me some background in here too. And because we had so much trouble staying on live, we lost a few of our people. So I'm just going to chatter a few more minutes while we wait for those folks to find us again. So let's see. Last week I was doing a series of edge to edge projects, meaning I just quilted from one edge of the quilt to the other, the same design, no stops for seams or borders or thread changes of color, anything like that. So I did a few of those, and I think that that was helpful. You know, I can still remember when I took up long arm quilting. It was so bewildering because it's not a thing that you stand in someone's studio and watch them do. It's quite a solitary occupation, right? And so I remember that feeling of, I just don't know what to do next or what decision I should make here or how in the world I based or whatever the case may be. So I thought that these live kind of unscripted sessions would be helpful for newer quilters to just see the process. So there's no editing, there's no cutting out of the thread breaks or the bits that don't go smoothly. It's just kind of end to end. Now, the quilt that I'm working on this week is quite large. It's 87 inches square. So I don't know that 100% of it will be done in these videos. I'll probably quilt between times because I don't want to tie up my machine for that many days. But you'll get a kind of segment of every different thing that I'm doing on it for sure. And you'll be able to follow the progress through it. So the quilt that I am working on is a vintage top. And it's one that I acquired actually at a garage sale. It's a Lone Star. You'll recognize it. So what I purchased at the garage sale was just the star. And it had been partially hand pieced, partly machine stitched, quite inexpertly, let's just say. So I saw, a hidden gem there and brought it home. And I started by pressing it really thoroughly as best I could. The seams are not straight. They have pleats and puckers in them all over the place, so I just did the best I could to press it as smooth as I could. And then I laid the entire star on a kind of linen colored background and hand appliquéd it down. And after that, I cut out my background fabric from behind the star. So you'll see that as I'm loading it today. So it's just one giant star. We have enough people to get going, Dave? Yeah. Okay. We would love to know where you're watching from in the comments. It gives us some sense of who we're reaching. Feel free to share these posts with your friends. They can chime in at any time. We're hoping to come on live about the same time each morning. Today's Tuesday, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for sure. We'll just see how the quilting is going at that point. So, what else? Oh, I posted on Facebook and Instagram this morning that I'm doing a giveaway. So if you were watching last week, I was doing some little edge to edge projects, and one of them was a vintage star quilt. And I've decided that I'm going to give that away. It's just kind of a celebration of launching my new masterclass, which is coming up. It goes live next week, actually. And so that little quilt was kind of a sampling of the style of quilting that I do and that I love and that I teach in that class. And of course, those of you who were watching got to get a sampling of kind of my style of teaching and imparting information. So that little quilt is a giveaway. All the details on the entries are on either Facebook or Instagram, your choice. And the draw will be Thursday evening. But for those of you who are new, we've got a couple pictures of it loaded so you can see what we're talking about. There's the first one. So that's kind of an angled overview so you can kind of get the gist of the quilting. Most of the stars are done with woven plaids. A lot of pastel colors in it. It's not super boyish, but it's not uber feminine either because they are plaids. They're not florals at all, right? So that's the quilting. There's a little more. That's my all over feather design, one of my all-time favorites forever to put on a quilt. Kind of traditional, which suited. This was a vintage quilt top as well, and it had been hand pieced, and it was done by a master stitcher. It was beautifully done. And that's a look at the muslin backing, and it gives you a good idea of the quilting. And also I cut the corners rounded. The way that it was pieced together, because they were all diamond or triangle shaped pieces, the corners were a bit short. They should have each actually had another piece added to them. So either I had to trim up the quilt and I would have lost several inches in length and what's already a small quilt, or my solution was round the corners. So I got out my low-tech tool, which was a dinner plate, and I marked the round corners and bound them, and it turned out really charming, I think. So that's the quilt that is up for giving away this week. Shipping anywhere in the continental US is included in the giveaway. You are free to enter from anywhere in the world, but we'll talk about shipping. I'll cover the equivalent of shipping in the US basically, and whatever else it may be, that's kind of on you. But it is a small and not heavy project, so shouldn't be too out of reach. There was a question, Dave? Yvonne, welcome. Nice to see you again. White Bear Lake, Minnesota. Cool. Jana, good. Boy, you guys are super fans. Welcome back. Deb from Virginia. Nice. Well, nice to see you ladies. Well, I'm going to stop talking so much and get on to the quilting. So I'll natter a bit as I go, but by and large, I'm just going to start working and you can just follow along. Have a cup of coffee. It's not going to be fast necessarily, right? You might just want this kind of going in the background while you're sewing or doing something in your studio, but you'll be able to kind of follow along in the process. So thanks for watching. Here we go. I will try and talk my way through as I'm quilting. This one is a much larger project than any I did last week, so we kind of have to see how it works with all these cords. I don't know how well it's going to work to wear a microphone the whole time. And we learned the hard way that if I don't wear a microphone, all the sounds of me touching the machine or the bars or what have you are just too loud. So we'll see how the microphone wearing goes. Okay. That's about as far as I can go with my machine. So I have this gorgeous kind of vintagey look backing, nostalgic looking. Also, it's kind of a busy print, so I did not have to match prints, which I thought was a plus because it is 3 fabric widths long. So I was happy not to do fussy seams on the back of it. So my preference for loading is always to have the selvage edges of the fabric parallel with my bars. Because when I'm doing this attaching with the red snappers or pins, whatever you're using, it really helps you not to overly stretch or overly pull in the fabric, right? The selvage gives you a good guideline. I will add as a side note, occasionally some selvages do pull up a little tighter, and in that case you'll have to make the odd snip so that it lays flat, but it's just helpful in enabling you to get a nice straight side. And also it is helpful to have any seams running horizontally as well. I think you can figure out the reason. If your seams go this way, they tend to pull just a little bit tighter, and it's difficult, especially with a large backing, to get it rolled on really smooth. So my preference is always selvages and seams running parallel with the bars whenever possible. As you can see, a much larger project than any we had going last week. And my backing is larger than I need. I needed about 2.5 widths of fabric, but because I'm loading it this way, I just let the excess run off the end onto my roller, and I'll just trim it off when the quilt is done, and I'll have a goodly sized chunk of fabric left over. If I had my druthers, I would move my machine further. I don't know that you guys can see on camera, but my fabric is a little rumpled up against my machine. I usually, on this back side of my quilting table, I usually lay the fabric out fully smooth so it doesn't pull left or pull right when I'm loading. My producer's going to give me a hand here, and we're just going to shift things a minute. Yes, it is. It is important to load it straight with no, pulling or veering off to the left or right. So I make sure that my quilt back, the sides of it, I'll come around where you can see me again, that the sides of it, even all the excess that's going out the other side, that it doesn't lay this way or lay that way. It goes straight over, even if it's in folds. Okay, I'm unlatched. And now I'll roll it up, just keeping a real weather eye on it, staying smooth. But it's pretty straightforward. You can see my seams roll up nice and straight. I'm about in the middle, so I'm just going to check that this is nicely smooth. There are no wrinkles anywhere, but I just like to confirm that. It is a lot of fabric we're rolling on. But how much easier is this than trying to square up a backing that is that big, right? I don't mind getting my few steps in, walking back and forth along the rails a few times just to confirm the smoothness. But any little irregularities in, cutting the length of the fabric will just sort of fall off the ends. And I don't have to worry about having this backing perfectly squared before I load it. I'm going to turn that one more time. There we go. So since I have selvages on all my seam allowances and on this side, it's pretty straight. But sometimes, particularly if you're loading your backing the other way around and the selvages are running on the sides and not the top and bottom, this edge can be quite irregular, and it really is okay. As long as you have rolled it smoothly, it will still be square. So you're accomplishing the squaring up process without pulling your hair out with a ruler and folding it 4 ways and all that stuff. Keep in mind as I talk that my style of quilting is not super duper duper high end as a rule, right? So if you were doing a show quilt, you would want to square it up more purposefully. But for the average quilt, this does just fine. And look how nice and flat that lays without too much effort on my part. I mean, how many minutes was that? Not very many to load. It's about a 92-inch backing, I believe. I'm using Hobbs 80/20 backing. I'm just doing 1 layer. This is going to be a using quilt, so I don't want it to be too heavy. The quilting would show up better if I did 2 layers of batting. It would be more spectacular, but I prefer my quilts to be a little lighter weight, so my option this time is just 1 layer of batting. I'm going to scoot it a little bit more to the right. So I'm just laying my batting right up against my red snappers or whatever your leader edge is there, whatever straight edge you've got. So it's on there pretty accurately straight. And I can see that there's no folds in it, so I'm comfortable with the straightness. And here comes the quilt top. It is so pretty. Oh, look it. Dave does the little overlays, the little frames, if you like. And we didn't change the title. So it is still freehand quilting, but it is custom this time. So here's the gist of the star, the lone star. You can see all the colors there. And you can see I've cut away my backing fabric. This is the back of it. And so I've cut away all the excess backing. Put it on this way. For those of you who maybe just joined, this star is another of my garage sale finds. And it was just the lone star itself. And it was in questionable shape. Let's say it was a diamond in the rough. And I saw the diamond in it. And it is partially hand pieced, partially machine pieced, fairly inexpertly done, I would say. You'll see as I'm quilting, there's a lot of pleats and puckers in it, a lot of seams that aren't straight. So all the diamonds are cut on the bias too, so that means it can stretch out of shape. That's a fact. But it also means that I'm free to manipulate it quite a bit. I don't know that you guys can see on camera, but my selvage along my backing fabric is pulling just a little bit tight. So I'm just going in with the scissors and putting a couple of 1/4 inch snips. Oh, I don't know, every 8 inches or so. That's going to be trimmed off my final quilt anyways, because you know how selvage often has the needle perforations on it. So I've got to trim a good 1/2 inch off anyways. So I'm just snipping through my selvage a little bit to let that fabric relax. Perfect. Now it lays much better. All right, and I'm going to do one more thing before I sew. This quilt has been flying around my house because I've been hand stitching the star down and everything, right? So one of my favorite tools is one of these little lint rollers. I think I've mentioned before, and I'm sure you see in my pictures, I have a black cat in my house. So there are little threads all over this and little black cat hairs all over it. So I'm going to keep this roller handy as I work today. And every time I advance the quilt, I'll give it a good brushing. And honestly, if I wasn't on camera, I would probably brush more. I could spend a little more time on this. But it'll have to be done again after the quilt is finished. But this is the easiest way, I feel like, to pick up just some of the lint and little fuzzy things that are on it. All stuck to my hand here. Much better. Much better. And I just keep this hanging close to my machine. Okay, so today I am going to use my long tape measure. I mentioned last week it's Colonial brand, something that I just bought on Amazon. It's about a $20 measuring tape, but it's long. It's 14 feet for sure, maybe even 16, because I have a 12-foot machine. And the way this measuring tape is marked is it has a center point and it counts out from there. I think the maker's goal was that you would, center your quilt and then know exactly how many inches out toward the edges. I don't center my quilt, as you saw when I loaded it. So I'm just going to make a note of my left marking and my right marking and keep them the same all the time. They happen to be both at 1/2 inches, so I'm just going to shift my tape a little bit so that they're at whole inches, just so it's easy to remember. And if I happen to get, 1/4 inches or things that are hard to remember, I just jot it down. Piece of paper, whiteboard, whatever you've got handy, sticky note, because you'll want to remember these numbers. So this really aids in keeping the quilt square as I advance it. Again, because this one has the entire star is bias, it would be so easy to stretch an inch or two or let it shrink up an inch or two as I progress down the quilt. So this will help me to know this side is always at 39, this side is always at 47, and every time I advance my quilt, I will keep it within those parameters. So that's just going to stay there until I get the whole thing basted. Try not to run over anything with my wheels. I'm always nervous the first time driving all the way down the rails. Is someone asking that, Dave, or is that your question? Dave's asking if there's anything I use my salvages for. There is, but the salvage on this quilt is boring because it's just cream colored. But I do have a thing about salvages. I really do. I save them all the time. I have literally boxes of them. And I love to make salvage projects, mug rugs, tote bags. And in fact, in my Etsy shop, I have a pattern for what I call a Bibliocat quilt. And it's a library quilt, essentially. I know you've seen them before, but it's kind of a whimsical take on it, and it's smaller, like a wall hanging. And I put things like a lamp and a black cat in mine, and the titles of all the books are salvages. And he loves that quilt. So, had to get its mention in. Need to pull my new thread through. So you're going to see that my basting thread is a little bit dark. I'm going to be quilting the star first after the basting is done. And so I picked kind of a light cinnamony colored thread for quilting the star. So I'm just going to baste it in that color too. And I see this is worth casting an eye over whenever you begin quilting in the morning, your thread path. I'm seeing something that is incorrect at this wheel. And so I'm just going to take a moment and double check that it is in there in the right place. It's kind of beside the wheel and almost into the spring. Anything like that will cause thread problems, believe me, and breakages. I'm actually just going to take the time to rethread it. I think I will waste less time doing that than by fiddling with it if I start having thread breakages. So bear with me while I rethread from this section on. And I might mention too, I know I talked a bunch last week and I'll talk a bunch this week too about my masterclass that is launching next week. And it is about freehand quilting and particularly edge-to-edge quilting, although lots of the designs I teach will lend themselves to a custom project like this. But one of the bonus modules is, trying to think of the exact name I gave it, but basically it's all the things I could think of for troubleshooting when you're having tension or stitch formation issues. So all the things to check for. And you know, there's a lot of obvious ones like thread path and rethreading the needle or new needle. There are some that are less obvious. And so that bonus module is kind of my collection. They're not all original to me. Other people have certainly devised many of these, but it's my collection of all the things to check for. And I kind of start with the easy ones, like a new needle, and go to the harder ones, like adjusting the little intermittent tension spring, those sorts of things. And all of that has an effect on your stitch formation. And it can be really frustrating when you're having consistent thread breakages or thread issues. And so I tried to collect all my favorite ways to troubleshoot that. Take that wheel off for the moment. And I'm not really talking about the threading too much because each machine brand is different. I'm using a Gamble Vision, and it's a 26-inch, so I do have quite a large quilting area. All right, now I'll do my thread break sensor. Yep, I've still got an issue going on here. is just too tight. There we go. Well, yeah, I was going to tell you guys about the shirt I wore for you this morning. This is a shirt that Gamel sells. It's probably backwards for you, but it says, well, you can read it. If you think chocolate is addicting, you've never tried quilting. I agree with that sentiment completely. While I fiddle with this thread because it's dead boring, I'll tell you just a little bit of my story. I've been making quilts all my life. My mother was a very traditional quilt maker. You know, with our cardboard templates, we traced our pieces with ballpoint pen, cut them out one by one. I learned to sew on a treadle sewing machine, hand quilt, all that stuff. And about 10 years ago, my husband and I and our family moved to Spokane, and we're from a northern area of Canada, so I didn't really have access to quilting classes and teachers and quilt shows and things like that. I had never been to any of those things till 10 years ago. And so one of the first classes I took was machine quilting, just on a domestic machine, because I knew I wanted to make quilts, and I didn't know other hand quilters, and I thought I need a faster way to produce quilts, right? So I did that for a while. I actually quite enjoyed it, quilting on my domestic machine, and that's kind of where I started getting the hang of free motion quilting. And then one of my friends has a very entry-level long arm machine in her home, so she invited me over one day to quilt a couple of baby quilts on her long arm. And I tell you what, by the end of that afternoon, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. So the rest, as they say, is history, pretty much. I bought my first used long arm shortly after that. And that was Lucy 1.0. And what I'm quilting on now is Lucy 2.0. I also found her used from someone else that was upgrading, to a computerized model. So Lucy 2.0 has a couple more bells and whistles, but not a lot, because the freehand work is what I love doing. So I do have a tablet attached to this one. I can do some computerized designs if I like. I have not done very many in the months that I've owned her, because this is certainly what I prefer for freehand work. Do what you love. That's my motto. So I am going to do a full baste of this quilt today. Still a simple baste. I'm not going to do a 6-inch grid or anything like that, but I'm going to anchor each pass of the quilt so that I'm able to advance it and rewind it as often as I need to. So let's see. I need to change to a basting length. So this is going to give me a stitch that's about 1 inch long. If you don't have a basting stitch on your machine, then I just recommend putting it on single stitch and not turning on basically not on go, but just single stitching, hop, 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 all the way across. I did that for years. It works. I'm just going to turn my horizontal lock on so I keep this fairly straight. I had this trouble last week, didn't I, where my needle would not raise all the way, and I thought I had fixed it. Now it's going. I just go slowly because since it only takes a stitch every inch, if you're sailing along, when the needle goes in, it really pulls on the fabric. So I just go quite slowly. This can be your meditation time or something. It is a bit time consuming to baste a quilt. Honestly, it's going to take us a chunk of time to get this done this morning before I even get into quilting. But in this case, I think that it's worth it. I don't have piecing in this quilt that enables me to kind of by eye line up my quilt and keep it straight against my rails, right? Because the whole star, everything in it is on bias, and my backing is not, floral or printed or pieced in any way. And so I don't want to get to the end and find that one side of my quilt is 2 inches longer than the other side of my quilt. So that's one reason for basting. And another is that I think I'm going to start my actual quilting at the star, which is in the middle, right? Well, I can't do that if I have not fully anchored the quilt. I do a few lock stitches at each end, because when I do begin quilting in the middle, I will pull out the basting stitches wherever I'm working, and I want to be able to just yank that thread and have it break. So if I have a lock stitch on my edges, I can just pull that thread without undoing my basting line, if that makes sense. Okay, that was the first pass. I shall get everything as smooth and flat as I can. My backing fabric is cut on the straight of grain. That, helps me to keep things straight. And it also does have a seam, had a seam. You can't see it there, but it runs right down through the middle, the center points of the star. So it's actually a square quilt when it's all said and done. So I will watch that those seams are the same on both ends. So I know at my halfway point, it's straight. And then at the end, I'll get it straight again. Probably an hour and a half to 2 hours, yes, because I feel like I don't want you guys to have to stand and listen any longer than that. I may leave it run a little longer, and you can come and go, or you're always welcome to come back and watch it on YouTube. We will be posting each episode the following day like we did last week. But in order to get the quilt done, I'm going to have to quilt more than an hour or two a day for sure. Dave, would you mind reaching in that cupboard behind you? I have another one of my stickies. One of the lint rollers. I'll point. The far right door. My lint roller is just about empty. Look at those little black cat hairs. It's terrible. There we go. Nice and clean. I find that when I'm advancing the quilt, if I don't pay a little bit of attention to my batting, it can often tend to pull up a bit in the middle. And so I tend to go kind of across, either one of two things. Either flip the whole quilt up and make sure the batting is all snugged down, or my shortcut, which is I kind of go along grabbing a pinch of the batting and quilt and just give it a little tug all the way along the quilt top to make sure that there are no excess, not even rumples. It's not even that far, but just no excess length in there. Yvonne, I'm piecing today. I hate piecing. Doing it with your company makes it seem so much more fun. Well, it's nice to know I could make that better for you, Yvonne. I'm lucky. I do enjoy all the parts of quilt making, and so I go back and forth between piecing and quilting. But I think quilting is my favorite. Still cat hairs. They are persistent. Gosh. Oh, I've got baste on still, and I don't want that. So I've lined up my edges with my numbers on the tape, as you remember. Pop quiz. What were the numbers? They were 39 and 47, so you'll see 39 coming up. I'm going to lock stitch there a little bit, and now I'm going to baste right across to the right. I hang on to my left side here. I don't have, you could put your clips on the side too, but there'd be a lot of clipping and unclipping as you're basting. So I just choose to hang on with my hand. Otherwise, it would very much pull and distort your quilt. So I just hang on about as long as my arm can reach. I recommend using a basting thread that does not exactly match, especially if you're going to be quilting over it with fine stuff. You want to notice it and remember to take it out as you come to it. You don't want to inadvertently quilt across it 10 times. Then it gets really hard to undo. It's not critical, but it's a thought. Still having just a little trouble with my needle, not always raising to its full extent. You can hear that every so often. So another reason I'm going slow. I don't want to break my needle dragging it across. I'm not quite sure what's causing that. You're always learning as a quilter, I tell you. Always, always learning. One of you ladies, I think it was Jody, pointed out a possible solution for that last week. Oh, I'm just going to go down this again because I was so close to the edge. It's all going to get hidden in the binding anyways. Anyway, I think it was Jody that pointed out an idea for possible solution for that. So I appreciate it. And Jody, if you don't mind, I may add that into my bonus module. I have not recorded that particular module yet. So I've made all the slide decks and it's fairly easy to go back and add something in. Where did I take my scissors off? Here they are. Always have your scissors on your machine. Note to self. I have a little hook to hang them on. So can you kind of see? You're just seeing. Do you want to make the overhead camera the big one, Dave, the main one for a moment? I hope that you can see, maybe, perhaps, how relatively smooth this is laying now on my quilting space. So even though there are some rumples in my diamond, that's all going to be stuff I work with, you know, as I get closer and get quilting. But for the most part now, this is fixed, right? My top and my bottom are fixed. That is not going to shift. The batting and the fabric are not going to shift. And as I quilt, I'm going to be quilting with the thought in mind to be stabilizing it too. So like I wouldn't start at this side and work across to this side on my star. I'll probably do something kind of in the center and then on each side, and all that sort of helps disperse any excess fabric that there might be and keep things from pushing to one direction or another. You can see these are the types of imperfections that are throughout the quilt. And I'm okay with that. When it gets done, I think you'll be amazed at how pretty this will all look. I hope so. Diamonds in the rough are like that. You never know for sure if the diamond's going to sparkle or not. But certainly the colors in this Lone Star caught my eye. I don't know what vintage the fabrics are. It's quite thin, but I do think it's 100% cotton. Certainly 70s or older. So here you'll be able to see how I kind of walk along the quilt and I'm kind of hoisting it and just a gentle tug on my batting to make sure that it's fully extended underneath there. And like I said, if you're really worried about it or if you're finding that's not doing enough for you, then another option would be to flip the top up each time, get that binding all snugged out, and flip the quilt back down. I tend to be a bit of a corner cutter. But you know, I figure if the end result is satisfactory, then it's an okay corner to cut. If my end result was not turning out well, I would realize I need to add in some more attention to detail. What was that, Dave? Rollers at the what? Ah, thank you. Okay. Yes. Oh, it's stuck. My husband brought me a new roller and it is like stuck to the bed of my quilting machine. Oh, this works much better. My other one must have been a little dried out from hanging for a while. These are lifesavers. Honestly, they are. For grabbing tiny threads or particularly batting lint and things like that. But especially for the pet hair and the human hair. They are just a wonderful thing. Okay. I always baste from left to right. Really, you could go either way. I'm just a creature of habit. I tend to do the U shape of my basting. Someone asked last week, she had read or heard or been taught that you should always baste from the bottom up to prevent, shifting of the fabric. Um, and I see the logic behind that. If I just sew down here without any attention to keeping my fabric smooth, it could easily run out in front of me. But the truth of the matter is that can happen when you're going from bottom to top as well, and you can end up with the pleat at the top. So I feel like it doesn't matter which way you stitch. You need to pay a little bit of attention to keeping this smooth. And in my case, I'm working with a pretty flat piece, but even so, I pretty much always put a little bit of tension behind my hopper foot, the area that's already stitched. It just prevents any excess from pushing out in front of me. And if there was any excess there, I'd be pulling a little harder to pull it in, if that makes sense. So I seldom just stitch and assume that it will come out right. Just got a weather eye on it all the time. Once again, there's my 39. 39, they tell me, is the new 60. Oh, I totally forgot. I'm supposed to be basting across. How come you guys didn't remind me? Just lock my thread in there again. Okay, back to the basting stitch. Hanging on again so that it doesn't pull. I would love to have feedback from you ladies watching as the days go on, sort of how, if this is helpful and how beneficial it is. It was a little bit intimidating for me to think of doing it because I'm sure you can imagine the thought of embarking on a quilt and not really knowing what problems you're going to encounter or even how it's going to turn out necessarily, and doing that all on camera, recorded for posterity, is a little bit intimidating. But I decided I'm just going to do it. I honestly can't think of very many quilts that I've done that I've disliked when they're all said and done. There have been lots of quilts that I've disliked while I'm doing them or haven't been happy with the result. And I have always found that if I persevere to the end, it looks great when I take it off the rails. So I'm having faith that that will happen again. Even if I wonder if I've lost my mind at some point during these diamonds, I'm going to have faith that it'll all turn out well in the end. Here again, I'm putting my tension this time in front of my hopper foot, but it's the area that's already stitched, right? And that pulls up any excess that might otherwise push like this in behind it. So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure in front. And again, the more excess there was, the harder I would push on that. Alrighty. Was that pass number 3 or 4? I think 3. One more basting line and we'll be at the bottom. So once again, giving my little tug, you can see in this area here, there is some rippling going on. If I only pulled my quilt top, there would be batting excess under there. So I grab the both of them together and give them just a gentle tug. Check my 39 on this side. Check my 47 on the other side. Do a little shifting and adjusting if I need to. And I'm keeping a weather eye on the bottom of my quilt here too to make sure, I mean, I can't really gauge the straightness of the line, but if there were real diagonal, folds in there, I would know I was not pulling that on straight. But it all looks good. We're going to get to the end and have a straight quilt, I feel safe in saying. Yeah, we're right on our side measurements. Okay. Yep, I will. in a moment. Time for a new sticky. Okay. All right, so I have visually, smoothed everything out in every direction. Checked my measurement at both ends. I do also give my backing, I don't know if you've seen me doing it, a tug at both ends. When I quilt, I will be putting, a slight amount of tension on that with my clamps, but I want to be sure that that backing has no folds in underneath here that I'm not seeing. So just light tugging on that, make sure everything is taut and snug. Taut is maybe too strong of a word, but flat with no pleats in it. Oh, look. My husband's saying, no, 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 you want to baste. He is so right. I don't baste all that many quilts. That's why I keep forgetting. And there, my needle stuck. Come on. I might have to contact my dealer about that one. It just seems odd that it only happens occasionally. Let's see. I'm sure there's a setting that I need to be changing. But I don't know what it is. And there it is again. So I'm just going slow in case. Does better where there's less thickness, for sure, less layers. So I mentioned early on that this star was just the star when I acquired it. And so I've just put it on a solid kind of linen colored backing. I use Paintbrush Studio Solids. I love them. So this was the linen color. And I hand basted the star, hand stitched the star down all the way around. And then I went in behind the star from the back and cut out the excess solid fabric from behind it. I didn't want that extra layer of fullness. So at about a 1/2 inch in, I could see my hand stitching from the back, right? So I just went around and cut out the background from behind it. My driving is not terribly straight in the basting, but once again, as long as I'm well within the 1/4 inch, doesn't bother me. I trim up my quilts with a ruler afterwards, and so they're nice and straight along the edge, and I have a nice straight guideline for putting my binding on. Okay, one more, and this is going to be the bottom of the quilt. How exciting! So when you baste like this, you will often need to adjust the height of your rails, as I do now. I'm just going to raise that up a little bit because I've got quite a chubby quilt going on here now, right? So a few things here. Smoothing out of my batting behind it. My measurements left and right. And once again, because I'm at the selvage again of my backing, right, I'm going to take a few snips in it. It doesn't seem to be pulling as badly on this side, but just to be on the safe side, Every 8 inches or so, I'm snipping in about a 1/4 inch, knowing that I'm going to trim at least a 1/2 inch off. There's no danger that I've cut into my finished quilt area. And now the proof will be in the pudding. When I put my channel lock on, we'll see how straight my backing actually is. How accurately I judged this. And I'm going to run my little kitty hair remover one more time. Just in case you're a client, I do endeavor for my client quilts to not let them come in contact with my floor. I have a trimming table and all that sort of stuff because I do have a cat, and not everybody has pets, and I get that. But for myself, and particularly because I hand appliquéd this big star on, and it was a big honking quilt in my lap, it certainly drug on the floor through that process. So there it is. Okay, one last basting loop. Cut that loop off, it's in my way. Where's my bobbin thread? I must have pulled it too short. I did. So I have some ideas for quilting this project, but if any of you ladies have a brainstorm, feel free to type it in. But my current plan is that I'm going to do continuous curves from point to point in all of the diamonds, and in 1 or 2 of the rows, like maybe the red and maybe 1 of the turquoises, I'll do something a little more elaborate that fills up the diamond a little more. And the diamonds may be too full to only do the continuous curve, but that's where I'm going to start. And then I think I'm going to quilt some type of kind of fancy feather all around the star, the perimeter of the star. So I'm going to pause right here. I can see that I am getting closer and closer to the edge, and I thought that when I was looking at it, that's what was going to happen. So I'm going to move my basting up just a little bit. And notice I'm not doing my basting stitch here. I've just got my regular stitch width on. That's because I'm at the perimeter of the quilt, right? And I'm not going to undo this one. It is going to stay. So I'm just moving up a little. Only about 1/8 of an inch. And I see again, I could have done more. I'm going to have to trim off more because I want to trim off all those holes that are in that selvage. So I may baste another line back across the quilt. But that's not too bad. We had less than a 1/4 inch of variance across that width. As you saw, I feel like that's an acceptable for working with, you know, a bias stretchy star that was handmade and inaccurate, and for my, you know, not terribly picky measuring, laying out of it. I think that's a pretty acceptable level of variance for me. I'm going to take a moment and change my needle. I'm not sure if you heard it in those last 2 seams, but I can hear it here. It's really popping when it's going through the fabric. And I just changed the needle yesterday, but for whatever reason, maybe I was working on, you know, tight weave fabrics yesterday. I feel like I've got a dull needle going on, so I'm going to change it out. That's one of my first clues, is when I hear a tick, tick, ticking when it's entering the fabric, you know, more than usual. You get used to what your machine usually sounds like, right? So I feel like I've got a dull needle. I don't know about you guys, but I keep a sharps container. It's not like a legal sharps container, but a closed container for sharps in my sewing room because I go through so many needles and, of course, rotary blades. Because I trim up people's quilts all the time, I change rotary blades just about every day too, on one of my rotary cutters or the other. And so I have a lot of blades going out. So I carefully keep something for my sharps in my sewing room. So I'm not sure if you can see it. Nope, because it's right on the front, but I'll show you. I have this little magnet. It's about 5/8 of an inch long that I put on the front of my needle. And I can tell when the belly of my needle, that little curved portion of the eye, I can tell when it's perfectly straightforward or not. Lucy 2.0, which is this machine, is happy when I've got it at about 5:27 on the clock. So just a tiny, tiny hair turned to the right. And I have just found that out by trial and error when I've had thread breakages and I've taken the time to just adjust the needle a little this way and a little that way. And it has to do with the timing when your rocker foot is catching the thread underneath. Each machine can be just a hair different. That's what I have found my Lucy likes. Okay, so we are all basted, ladies. I'm going to now take my tape measure off because everything's squared up, so I don't need to fuss with that being in front of me anymore. And I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim the batting along this edge because I'm going to end up rolling this end back and I don't want all that fullness in there, right? No need for that bulk in my roll up. So I'm just going to trim it close-ish to the edge of my quilt. And I'll keep this chunk. I don't think it's wide enough for a baby quilt, but I am a batting piecer. From time to time, I will, this is the whole width of a quilt now, right? So that with another piece similarly, I could bat a whole nother quilt with it. Different ways for attaching them, and that's a different topic for a different day. But so I am happy with that. So we're going to go back to about the middle of the quilt and start assessing where we're going to quilt next. And don't be alarmed by the wrinkles you see. So there's my center of the quilt. And I believe that is where I'm going to start. I'm going to get this point on this side and this one on this side established. And that will reduce so much of my shifting. And then I can work up and or work down. I am going to quilt, I believe, the whole star before I start the background, because the background's going to be a little bit tighter, a little bit closer, kind of artsy fill, and the diamond is apt to have a bit looser quilting. So I'm going to do the whole diamond first. I do need my ruler plate. I will be using my ruler from time to time throughout this quilt, and so I think I'll likely just leave it on the whole time for the sake of ease. There it is. I'm going to lower my quilt a bit. I've got a lot of clearance going on there, more than I need to. The good news is I don't have to use my magnetic bars at all on this project, right? Because everything is held by basting. It can't shift it all on me. Okay, ladies, what are we going to do? I have some of these I call them design boards. It's just a plexiglass sheet. And mine are 18 inches by 24. And these are what I call my audition boards. And they can just lay right on top of the quilt. I have a wet erase marker. I have a scrap piece of batting for an eraser. And I can sit here and audition designs like crazy on my quilt top. Dave's going to try and get the camera closer. I don't know how that's going to work. It'd be interesting, actually, if you can see this star. Is it showing well? Because I'm seeing, okay. It'd just be interesting for you guys to see how irregular this star really is and what a sort of transformation quilting will make. It's going to be a beautiful quilt when it's finished, but you can see how irregular this is, right? The seams do not at all meet up in the point. It's fairly bulky in the point. You also may or may not be able to see on camera. It's a bit discolored, and there are a few places on the quilt that are like that have just a bit of dinginess, if you will. I suspect that the quilt's been drug around from pillar to post for 40 years, right? So it is, I'm sure, dirty. Almost always with a vintage quilt, I will choose not to wash it until it's quilted, reinforced, and finished, because I just don't know how fragile the fabric is or how it will stand up to it, and certainly it would have frayed. So I've opted to just finish the quilt as is, and I will give it a gentle wash afterwards. Okay, so on our star. This is my thinking. This is a motif that I like and that I find easy to do. I'm going to pick a center point, which, you know, the seams don't all line up, so I'm just going to pick my center point. And I'm thinking I'll just do something like this sort of swirl and just do it all the way around. That fills in the diamonds. Well, I missed my hook in there. But that fills in the diamonds fairly nicely. There's no huge unquilted area. And I may find that I have to do that over the whole diamond. My original thought, as I mentioned, was to do some of this continuous curve. I just don't know if that's enough quilting. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. Certainly another option would be a second time around. That can get difficult to do in those long, thin points. That's an option. I'd love to hear some other thoughts, what you'd put in the diamonds. But we're going to start by doing the center for sure. And I think I debated about changing threads for each of these colored areas, but I've decided not. I'm just going to use my cinnamon colored thread for the entire star. That's just, I don't think there's a right or a wrong. That's just my choice in the interest of time. Oh, your camera, Dave. Sorry about that, ladies. You get so used to just winging your quilting machine around, right? There we go. Okay, so once again, I am just going to pick my center point and always anchor my diamonds at that point. Looks like I might be out of bobbin thread. That would be too funny if it came to the end, right at the end of basting, wouldn't it? No, it didn't. It's just pulled too short. I am, however, close to the end, so I'm choosing to just change out my bobbin and put a fresh one on. Bear with me a moment while I get another one winding. Dave. So Yvonne is suggesting that I maybe alternate designs because she likes both ideas. And I confess that kind of was my original idea, was that I could highlight, you know, maybe the red or maybe the aqua or maybe both. So maybe that's a good idea. Maybe in all of the colored portions, do the little whoop whoop with a hook. And in the cinnamony portions, do the continuous curve. I'm just trying to follow through in my mind what a continuous curve will look like. Like to keep a continuous line, for example, if I want to quilt a whole diamond, right? So I know for this center part, they all begin from the middle, so I'm just going to get that done, break thread. But is there a way that I could then quilt this whole diamond without having to break my thread? And then a hook, and then this. Well, I think I can certainly do pairs. And that's not too bad for thread breakages. Let's give that a try. And I'll show you what I mean by pairs. That might not have been self-evident, but you'll see as I go. Okay, I'm brain dead and talking too much. I forgot to put the bobbin in, ladies. It is helpful to load a bobbin. Where did I set it down, for goodness sakes? Now I'm wandering around my quilting room trying to figure out where I set down my bobbin case. I've got the new bobbin wound. Okay, this is hilarious. You guys, we did say this was live and unscripted, didn't we? Where did I set down my bobbin case? It's a good thing I have a spare. If I have to, I'll fish out the spare one. Like I literally just had it in my hand. How can this happen to people? This doesn't happen to any of you guys, does it? Got it. Phew. Oh my goodness. And I am going to take a moment throughout this quilt to use my TOA gauge. I will bring that over here where you can see it in case some of you aren't familiar with it. This is a TOA bobbin tension gauge. Whoa. There you can kind of see it on camera. It's just a way to measure the tension on your bobbin at the beginning of each one. And I keep my bottom tension usually at about 180 for this machine. I find that different machines really have a strong preference for what type of bobbin tension they like. My last Lucy, though she was the same brand of machine, only a different model, liked really high tension on the top thread. That was the only way I got good stitch formation, and I learned that from my representative who was here and helped me troubleshoot that. But this machine plays happily at about 180. So if I keep my bobbin tension at 180 and then I adjust my top tension, actually up here, just a little bit as needed to make a good stitch formation. And I'll show you a couple other fun tricks as we go. One of them is, because of course you can't see the bottom, I don't have an underneath camera. Lots of us don't. One of my tips is after you've stitched a while, and I usually do this on my basting, I will run a fingernail along the stitched line, and if you can hear it ticking, you've got some laddering or eyelashing going on under there, and you know that your top tension needs to be tighter or your bottom looser. If your top tension is too tight, that will be visible to you as you're quilting. So between those two things, I can usually make a pretty good gauge of whether my stitch formation is good. And once a quilt is underway and I don't change thread colors or thread types, usually then it will stay standard. So I'll just keep setting my bobbin now at 180. And if I'm getting a good formation from the top, I can be pretty sure that it's good both ways. If you're not sure, my other method, not having a camera, is I just have a little handheld mirror and I have a flashlight on my iPhone, and that's how I look underneath the quilt. From that side, I would just hold my mirror and run along underneath. It takes way less time to check than to undo. Ask me how I know that. Dave's asking me, how do you know that, Sue? I'm sure we've all done it. Undone entire passes of quilting. Yeah, it's not pretty. So here we go. I'm going to stop at a point and trim my thread, and I've once again set down my scissors. I'm seeing in there just a little bit that my top tension is a little tight, so I'm going to loosen that up a dab. Doesn't matter which direction you go around, I choose to go this way. I do love this shape in anything that's got a central motif and diamonds, just because it fills the diamonds up so nicely. We're backing up. You're seeing the effects of talking and quilting at the same time. I lost my rhythm of which way to be going with that swirl, and I went the wrong way. I'll move my machine a little so you can watch me unpick. It's really exciting. I do have, by the way, a cream colored thread on the bottom, and even when I change between the cinnamon on the top and the cream on the top, I'm not going to change that bobbin thread. I'm going to consider it close enough. It's 2 or 3 shades different, but it's not so vital that I'd be apt to see eyelashing of that thread coming through to the top. That just enables me to wind, you know, bobbins efficiently. I did not lock and bury my thread. I could. I don't think this quilt is delicate enough, whatever, heirloom quality enough to make that worth my time. So I'm going to use a lock stitch throughout. I can do a pretty unobtrusive lock stitch, and I'm happy with that. And now I'm not going to talk for a minute, and I'm going to pay attention to get all my hooks running the same way, okay? Once again, stop and clip my thread tails. Nice and snug. And again, a couple of lock stitches there. And there's our center star. All right. Oh, wow. Wow. Yvonne, does your mirror with a light and a telescoping handle fit in my philosophy of low-cost tools, though? But sometimes, I totally agree. Sometimes a good tool is worth its weight in gold. So, okay, let's talk about thread path here a minute. I'm just going to think this through. If I decide I'm going to do the continuous curve type, just point to point on the cinnamon, and I'm going to do my hook on the aqua, my aqua hooks would originate from the bottom. So if I do one swoop, do the whole hook and come back to this point, go around and around, do the whole hook and back. Am I getting all the sides? So I'm at this point, around, hook, and back, around, round. So I have not done this area then. But I should be able to do it through these three, which is my diamond. And then I should be able to go back and back, I think. Let's try it out. Sometimes you just don't know till you try. Here we go. Give Dave a moment to move that camera. I'm trying to decide if I want to edge stitch around the blue star. I say no. I'll get close so you can see it. See how these points don't match up? That happens pretty well every point throughout the quilt. Any point that did match was a happy accident. So I'm going to try to not do too many things where that matters. And even in my continuous curve, I'm going to make my stitching try and hit the previous stitching, which may or may not be on the point of the diamonds. So let's just begin. I'm going to do one more thing, because again, when I get stitching, my peripheral vision, it's hard to focus on what's around me. So I'm just going to mark the edges of this diamond so I don't inadvertently overshoot them. Just this way, so I know I'm quilting in this area. This is just painter's tape. There we go. I was doing a Lone Star a week or two ago that it was just the continuous curve throughout it. It was a much finer star. And I kept finding, trying to work on one whole diamond, I kept overshooting it and running into the next one, even with my lines of continuous curve. So I know from experience that I need a guideline for my eye. I'm going to try and freehand these curves. We'll see what happens. I feel like it would be way too time consuming to do it all with a ruler. You can see I'm pausing before the aqua bits to make sure I'm going in the right direction. And now I should be able to finish my continuous curve with luck. And you see there, I went for the stitching point, not for the brown point, if that makes sense. So now I will have to break thread. So it looks like for every pair of rows, so a cinnamon row plus a colored row, I will be able to do it in one pass. I can live with that. That's not too many thread breakages. Okay, on to the next one. Okay, what was that, Dave? Oh, perfect. Thanks, Yvonne. I will look into that because, you know, that might just be worth it. So I see that I've made a goof already. I should have been stitching this red one. Can you guys see it? It's probably hard to follow from where you are. So I'm going to end up with another thread breakage, but I'll get the hang of this. Breakage is not the right word. Thread break, you know what I mean. I feel like my top thread is still pulling a bit tight. Now I'm going to do another fudge. And I'm going to backtrack over these two. To do this. And then backtrack one more time. And do this one. I'm pleased with that. Can you see it? Okay. Dave's bringing the camera closer so we can have a look at that. I think that'll be attractive. It's going to emphasize the sort of rings of color. There's also rings of the hooks in the quilting. I think that'll be pretty. Whoever's idea that was, thanks for that. It was a good one. So now I go around 3 sides of my brown before I hit an aqua. Yeah, okay. I'm actually going to take just a jiffy here to undo a bit of this basting. Now at this point, I won't remove the whole line because I want the rest of the quilt to still be held in place. I'm just going to remove this area where I'm stitching, and the rest of it I'll just leave in place for the moment. Uh-oh. Rookie mistake, you guys. So I just bumped up. Because I've got my ruler plate on underneath, I don't have as much clearance this way, and I just bumped against my rail. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that 4 inches of stitching since that's all I had done with my new thread. And I will advance my quilt just a hair. Either that or I might take that ruler plate off while I do the star, actually. So the next time I think that I need to use my ruler is I'm going to actually stitch in the ditch around the star eventually. which I could certainly have done before I do the detail quilting. I'm not sure. We're going to try a diamond or two and see how it goes, but if it does not pull the fabric too far out of whack, I'll do my ruler stitching afterwards. So it's going to involve a lot of backing and forthing of the machine. Okay, let's rewind this just a hair to make sure we're on the safe side. And pull the ruler plate off until it's needed. Lots of quilters that do quite a bit of ruler work just leave it on all the time. I find it to get very much in my way. And you know, I'm going to put some clamps on the sides too. Again, I'm kind of in the groove of doing these things habitually, but when I'm talking, I am tending to forget the little bits as I go, but generally I would have clamps on the side all the time. A little bit of tension on that backing, particularly. We don't want any ugly pleats in the back. There we go. All set. Let us begin again. Do you see what I just did? If you don't see it, though, I'm not going to tell you. But I will fix it. And in cases like this, I think you can see this one now, where the points of the diamonds did not come together, I'm going for the point of my color because that's where I'm launching my hook. If that makes sense, not necessarily the point of the cinnamon. Here again. Okay, you guys, it might be time for a coffee break. I have now done 2 of my hooks facing the wrong direction in that row. My hope is that if I know it to be true. If I make my stitching points align with my stitching and not attempt to meet the different colors of fabric, then when viewed from the back, I will get a nice pattern on the back. I don't know that it's going to matter in the case of this quilt because it's a quite busy back. But you'll notice I managed to put... Do you know, guys? I'm going blind. Which way, Dave? Left or right? They're just a little different as to shape, but they are actually going all the right way. Isn't that funny? I was positive that I had alternated a couple of them. Oh, okay, now I get it. They are all going the same way. They're just not exactly the same as to shape. So I did not mark these, as you saw. All I'm doing is attempting to get my initial circle is kind of in the center of the widest point of the diamond. And I think that's satisfactory. Okay, phew. Taking a deep breath and moving on. Next row. And yes, this is really what I'm like in my sewing room. A little bit flighty. few lock stitches. Good. False freak out. Rejoice and move on. That's the truth of it. False freak out. I'll remember that one. Yes, you give yourself a scare, all for nothing. I was just sure I would do something like that, you know, this morning on camera, and probably I will at some point. But the weave or something in these fabrics must vary just a little bit. I'm finding, you probably can't see it on camera, but I'm finding that the stitch quality looks a little better on some of the colors than on the others. It looks best on the pale aqua. And I think that's all it is. I'm sure you've noticed when you stitch on Moda fabrics and then you go to Kona fabric, you know, it looks a little different, just the loft or something in there, how the stitches settle into the fabric or lay on top. Just looks a little different from fabric to fabric. That's what I'm seeing here a bit of. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit slowly and give you guys a nice little view of that. Oh, Dave's going to move the camera. We'll move the painter's tape onto the next diamond. And then you can have a wee look at that. I'm pleased with that. I like the rings. That was a great idea, Yvonne, of the hooks. And it's not too fussy. I knew I would not be able to, for example, do point-to-point details with my ruler in these diamonds because of the points being so unequal and unmatched. So this is a nice, relaxed way to quilt it, but it still plays up the diamonds very much. So I like that a lot. I'm happy with that. So that's one diamond done. So I think maybe what we'll do is I'll quilt one more whole diamond. You guys can give me feedback on this, but probably at that point I'll go off air and then I'll finish the other diamonds on my own. But if you're really enjoying this, I can stay on. It's not a big deal. I don't have much more to say is all, because things won't be changing. But if you want to see every last stitch in these diamonds, I can do that too. I'm just going to grab a sip of my coffee here. Getting a wee bit parched. All right. So now I have to get my head in the game because I'm doing not a mirror image, but, you know, around the clock image, basically. So I need to get all my hooks going the other way. So because I'm pretty afraid that I will get it wrong, I'm going to actually draw a couple of them on here so that I get them going the right way. So they go this way. This is the way I'm going to launch into them. This is just an air erasable pen. So it's going to disappear. So this, I'm not necessarily going to quilt on this line. This is just going to remind me. By then it should be in my head, hopefully. That's just going to remind me which direction to turn. One little row. Must be a humid day. My little marks are gone already. So I do have some excess fabric in this area. So what I'm going to do is put a couple pins in so that I can't inadvertently push it further than I want to. I don't know that I can stitch a continuous curve with one hand. That's the problem here. So we're just going to have to try. There we go. We got it. Yeah, it's very interesting. The tension just shows up differently on this red. It looks like my top thread is still too loose, but I don't think it is. The thread just seems to lay right on top. Okay, I'm just going to look here a minute because once again I omitted that first red. Okay, if I go down first, then I only have to backtrack on one. Alrighty, scissors. Take my pins out of there. I'm actually pleased with how flat it's laying. Like, I did not know how difficult it would be to pull in. I'm going to show you this one. Can you see this little diamond over here? Well, I don't know that that will help, Dave. Oh, there you go. Can you see this little round diamond over here? Excess fabric for one thing. The seam allowance changes direction for another right here. I mean, I could go crazy trying to control all of that stuff, and I'm not going to. I'm just going to quilt it down. I'm just going to try not to get any pleats in it. I'll call that a success if I manage no pleats. But let's take some of this basting thread out. Just a little bit on both sides of that so we don't stitch it in place. And I just leave those threads hang for the moment. They're not hurting anything. And I just unthreaded my needle. Whisking threads away too vigorously. All right, let's start at this top side. I'm really quite pleased at how flat everything is staying overall. All things considered. going to take a sec to clip those threads before I go back. Sure, let's take a question. Jody, I don't think I understand your explanation of how you quilt into the gaps between diamonds. Can you explain that part again? Are you meaning where they're off kilter and the points aren't matching? Is that kind of what you're referring to, Jody? I'll take that assumption for the moment and give you a closer look at that. Where's a good example? Here's one. Okay. Can we see this one right here? Yeah, we can see that pretty well. So see where the red one is way down here where it intersects and the blue one is way up here? I chose to hit the aqua point because that's where I was launching into my hook. And so then when I was doing my continuous curve on the cinnamon, I just also used that aqua point. So I really have not quilted to that red point. I think when all is said and done, that's not going to catch the eye as much as if my swirl ended here and my continuous curve also came to this point, right? I don't think I could emphasize both points. So I've chosen to just pick one point, use that as my intersection. Hope that makes sense and is what you're asking. Okay, perfect. So, and you know, they're not all perfect. Like for example, here, I'm going to find that when I do a continuous curve down, they haven't even met. So I think I probably will do my continuous curve so my stitching bumps up against this one. Like I said, this backing is quite busy and so it doesn't really show, but if it were, say, a solid backing and it showed more, I would want that to be closed on the backing so that I have an attractive look on the back of the quilt as well. So it's just a judgment call. I mean, this whole quilt is a judgment call, right? It just is. So. There again, I was just aiming for the colored point because that's where my hook starts. And again. And here we've got a big old pleat under here. I'm not going to do a thing to it. I'm just going to stitch right down to my continuous curve point and just let that be. There again, I just went down to match my last stitching. And here's the one I pointed out. So that may not be a work of art, but it is all stitched. And basically my criteria for the judgment call is, what do I think will catch the eye more? You know, if I have 2 points where my threads all intersect, or if I pick one point that's not on the actual seam. So here's the one in question, because I ended up stitching right across that aqua, right? But in fact, here is my intersection where all my quilting lines converge. So if I were looking at the back of the quilt, you know, they would all converge. That would appear to be the point, not this one. So yeah, again, my criteria for the judgment call is just, what do I think will catch the eye more? I'm a little unsure about leaving all these seams unquilted because I think they're going to pop up a little bit. But I don't really see how I could resolve that because the lines just don't run straight and true. We'll maybe step back and look at that when I get this diamond done. Because it would not be impossible to go back and stitch down all those lines yet. The question is, should we? Okay, that was the end of our diamond. So we'll step back and take a look at these 2 diamonds now. They're across the whole width of the quilt and kind of make some decisions. There's another thread tail hanging. I'll move the machine out of the way. Dave will adjust the camera for you so you can get a good view. And I'll move my sticky tapes. We'll probably use them again. Yeah, just one entire diamond will be a good look, I think. So there's one completed diamond there. So the question now is, are these seams okay just sticking up as they are? Or should I be attempting to stitch in the ditch of all those diamonds? It's a tricky decision. Ideally, I would like to stitch down each of those diamonds. They're fairly big. They're about as far as I can span, you know, from my little finger to my thumb. So they're a generous 6 inches from point to point of the diamond. So I feel like they would benefit with those seams being stitched, but a number of those seams are hand stitched and are a little bit fragile. A lot of those seams flip-flop directions, like halfway in the middle, like 50% of them or more. So it will be difficult to stitch in the ditch and make it look anything like attractive. So I, for this quilt, am going to decide not to. Yvonne has an opinion. Stitching down lines. I think that because the tan is present in each and every one of those puffed up seams, it'll be a background, non-obtrusive feature. I think stitching down the uneven seams would be a nightmare. I agree with you, Yvonne. I think it would be difficult to do, and I'm not convinced that it would look good. Because again, I'd be dealing with all these intersections that don't line up, right? So what am I going to do with my line? Jog it 1/4 inch? Doesn't make sense. So for this quilt, for the state that it's in, all those things considered, I'm leaving that diamond as is. That's all the quilting it's going to get. So when the diamond is all done, we're going to do something pretty in the background, and that'll kind of be a distraction to the eye too. So people will see the colors of the diamond, hopefully, and the pretty quilting in the background and think that it's a beautiful quilt. That's the goal. Okay, so I'm going to continue quilting these diamonds today. I guess I'm going to let my cameraman, which is my husband, choose whether he wants to sit here for longer and tape more. Okay, he's good for about a half an hour. He does have some other commitments this afternoon. So I'll leave it on and stitch some more diamonds. I suspect what's going to happen with the other ones is I won't be able to do an entire diamond without rolling my quilt back and forth. So there's going to be a bit of that in there, but that's just the name of the game, right? So nice though, now we've made all our decisions, right? Now we can just get on with quilting. I'm always happy when I get to that part. I know what I'm going to quilt. I'm happy. So I'm going to go back now and do some of the upper diamonds. And I believe I'll do the one in the center first. Again, with my philosophy of trying to always working toward affixing areas, right? To reduce shifting. So instead of starting here and working all the way across and possibly getting folds running over like that, I'm going to make sure it's evenly spread. I've got my basting here, my basting here. I'll do this diamond and then come back and do each of those. And that will keep everything as firmly fixed as possible. Let's see. I'm going to put my tape on here to mark where my diamond is. I might have advanced too far already or rolled too far. I did. Yeah, I'll start at this end and work up. Okay. This is how you get your steps in. You keep rethinking things. You run from one end of your quilting machine to the other. I was chatting with on Instagram the other day with a friend, and I made a comment about my little blue Rolo cup that's on the top of my machine. I doubt, yeah, you can see it actually right here. I've got it just stuck on a peg up there, and that's my thread receptacle, and also I throw my marking tools and my seam ripper in there. Anyway, this friend was saying, She keeps a trash can for her threads at the end of her quilting machine and makes herself run for every snip to get her steps in. And I said, good for you. That was Quilting is My Bliss, by the way. Many of you might follow her. She's a great quilter and a great lady. Quilting is My Bliss is her handle on Instagram, and her name is Teresa Silva. Put a little plug in for Teresa. She's a great quilter. So once again, I'm removing basting threads for the area that I'll be working in and just leaving the tails hang for the moment. All right, here we go. Oh, we need to distinguish, we need to decide which way our curves are going so we get this right. They all go this way. Yeah, this way and this way. I'm going to show you one of my other low-cost tools. I don't know if you can see in the camera or not. You probably can. The basting stitches, there's marks there where those holes were. And it's not actually a hole. The threads are just pushed apart. For one thing, because long arm needles are kind of fat, and for another, because there's a fair bit of tension on those stitches, right? Because they're holding all these layers in place, and those holes are apt to keep showing. Here's one of my favorite tools. One moment while I grab it. This, I don't think so. This is a little surgical brush. And really any small brush would do, but the surgical ones have the silicone bristles. They're quite soft. But I use this to help me remove those types of markings, or even sometimes when you've undone a line of stitching and it really still shows. If you moisten it a little bit, if your fabric is water safe and everything, moisten it a bit and give it a brisk brushing with these bristles. That will just move those fibers back into place. So a little soft bristled brush is a handy tool in your quilting room. I may have asked this last week in my quilting sessions, I don't recall, but I'm curious what kind of machines you ladies quilt on. Are you long armers or mid armers or domestic quilters, and maybe even what brand you use? I have only ever owned a Gamel, but I've quilted on a number of others. I'm familiar with a couple of them. Okay, this time I'm not going to forget the first one. Oops, knocked my tape off. Ah, if you were going to do more quilting. So like another curved line, you're thinking, Yvonne, to add a secondary line. I just, they're so irregular shaped that even my curves are so irregular. I don't know that I could get an echo in there and make it look anything like good. I'll come to the side of these brown ones. I don't know if you can see. Like looking at my quilting from straight on, it frankly looks messy. But those diamonds, like every one of them is a different shape. They're skewed, some edges are longer. So I don't know that I could make an echoed line and make it look good. I think I'm going to leave well enough alone. But it's a good suggestion, absolutely. And anything is on the table. And if any one of you is quilting this, you might have different thoughts about what's appropriate or what's enough or what you want to spend time doing on your own project. But for me, I happen to know that there are a few more vintage quilts still in my cupboard, so I don't want to get caught up in spending weeks on this one. I just want it to be quilted. An HQ Avante and an HQ, what did you say? Fusion? Fusion. Nice. I'm trying to think what the first one was that I quilted on. It was something like a Sweet 16, which is kind of a lightweight machine. Nothing against it by any means. It's a good home use machine, but knowing at the outset that I wanted to quilt for other people and as a business, I kind of went for the commercial use. It had things like you raised and lowered a presser foot just like you would on a sewing machine. Like it was quite different. Definitely not as heavy duty either. Went a little far out on that one, didn't I? Losing track of which way I'm going. Oh, here we go. That's the beauty of having points like this. It gives you a built-in place to pause and regroup. Recalculating. Well, I got a fair-sized wobble there. But it takes quite a bit for me to undo. And I've learned that from other quilters. By nature, I'm a bit more of a perfectionist in terms of my quilting. But I have learned that skill from other quilters, that in the big picture, from a galloping horse, as so many quilters say, it's not going to really matter. And also, Angela Walters, I think, was the first one I heard say, you do not learn by undoing. You learn by doing. So she's a big proponent of just quilt it. And the small imperfections will just not be visible when it's finished. Once again, we'll take some basting out. Making sure, right, that you take I don't know if you saw that. I pulled up a loop and snipped my bottom thread as well. You don't want to only pull the top thread out and stitch the bottom one in. You want both of them to be coming out of there. Yvonne's on an Innova. Oh, lucky you. I did test drive an Innova. There's a number of things I really like about them. One of them being their lightning stitch, which is lightning stitch regulator, which is absolutely awesome. And I'm curious what yours has, if anything, in the way of channel locks. I knew that I was not purchasing their higher end computerized models, and so I wanted the channel locks that the Gamma offers. So that was kind of the hill I stood on, if you will. Because I do a lot of straight line quilting, like just horizontal lines, and I really wanted the ease of the channel locks. I keep losing my train of thought here. There's a few really awkward ones in this one. So I'm just going to trust that when it's all said and done, that those will still look smooth and your eye will not be drawn to the funky points. And honestly, that was part of my assessment when I first looked at this Lone Star at the garage sale. You know, I could see points like this that were so poorly matched. But I made the call that I thought it was worth saving. So I'm not sorry. I love the colors in it. All right. That's 3 diamonds done. Several to go. Again, I believe I'll forward and start in the middle and work my way out. I think that's far enough. When I stand back and look at it kind of against the light, this whole alternating hook and continuous curves really accentuates almost the checkerboard look and loses a bit of that, but maybe when it's off the rails, but it loses a bit of that circular look that you catch of the color. So we'll see how that turns out when it's all said and done. As always, there's so much you just don't know until it's totally finished. No, it's not. Whew! Gracious. Pulled a little too tight on that elastic. Flipped it right off. This backing, by the way, you can't really see the print, but it's just kind of nostalgic. It's got some prints of flowers, some newspaper, some writing, some vintage looking copper plate and calligraphy. Anyway, I got it at Hobby Lobby, and it says in the selvage that it was printed for Hobby Lobby, and you know, sometimes their fabrics, You want to heft them and feel them and make sure they're nice quality, but this is particularly nice. I was really, really pleased with it. Just has a beautiful feel to it. I'm just going to make sure that I can get to the bottom there. Yep, I sure can. I don't know if you can see in the camera, there's a 41 there. There's quite a bit of ballpoint markings on this quilt throughout. And well, I haven't washed the thing so far, but I don't think I'm going to attempt to clean them either. I'm just going to let that be part of the charm. Hopefully, someone thinks that's charming. So someone is asking if the Hobby Lobby fabric is a wide back, and no, it is not. So my quilt is 87 inches square, so I had to buy 3 lengths of it to make my backing. So there's 2 full-length seams. But I'm sure you all know how to use the Hobby Lobby coupons to get yourself a good deal on that. So that's what I did. And I'm just undoing basting as I go, keeping it out of the way. And overall, you can see this is turning out to lay quite nice and flat. And you know, that was certainly a concern. The diamond had bubbles in it, and obviously, you know, the seams, every single edge is a bias, and there's lots of room for being skewed. So that lets you know why I work this way, where I try and, you know, stabilize with my basting lines and then stabilize in the center and then work on each side. All of those things combined help me to keep a nice flat quilt when all is said and done. I forgot I'm going into the red this time. I need to undo a little bit more basting. There we go. I'm going to move the quilt a little. I can't quite reach enough to finish that aqua diamond, but I think I might not have to take off my side clamps. I can just move it a couple of inches, just enough to reach. I'm just going to trim these basting threads a bit. They're getting very long and unwieldy. Into the thread cup they go. Yep, just had to confirm which way I was going. Funny little pleat there. I'm going to try and catch that in my stitching. That will hopefully help it lay down a little flatter. We're coming along. I think if I pull the machine back just a little more, I can finish this whole point. I'm just trying to be aware of where those pleats are and what I'll need to do about them. This one will work fairly well. Can you... Dave's got the overhead camera on. I'll wait till he changes his camera back and I'll show you this one because it's a good little illustrative point. So there's quite a pleat here. But when I think through my stitching path, I know I'm going to be coming this way around and stitching it down, which will work beautifully. If it went the other way, or if I was stitching this way, I would probably rethink my quilting path just so that I wouldn't be going this way with my hopper foot, right? Because that's what's going to happen. But because I'm going the proper way across it, I'm just going to stitch it down. Does that make sense? My brain is constantly kind of doing that as I go. My eyes are looking around, what's coming up, what am I going to need to deal with, and is there any way I could make it easier on myself just by changing something like my thread path. Am I going down or up? I'm going up. You'd think after all these diamonds that would be firmly in my brain, but no. Okay, one more little pass to do, and then I think we're going to call it for today. My husband has other commitments, and as he's the cameraman and is very important, we can't continue without him. So I'm going to go ahead and keep on quilting a bit today, and I'll probably have all these diamonds finished before I come back tomorrow. And I think I'll start tomorrow then with edge stitching, like in the ditch around the entire star, and then we'll start working on background. So that's what tomorrow will consist of. And I'm still thinking, I mentioned earlier, my first thought was that I want to do kind of a wide, almost border around framing the star and do some kind of a bit elaborate feather in that. And that's still what I'm leaning toward. I may look through some of my books tonight or scroll through some of my social media feeds and see if anything else strikes my eye. But so far, that's what I'm leaning toward. So I would be kind of blocking that in place tomorrow too and probably quilting that feather. And establishing all the, the borders and things that I need for that. There it is. So we'll maybe get one more kind of overall look at what we've accomplished today, although I don't think I'm going to roll the quilt. But you kind of get the idea. These two are right side by side. Everything is laying basically flat and smooth. There's the odd pleat. Dave's going to zoom in just a little bit. Get a wee pointer. Yeah, there's the odd pleat like this one. I might actually take an iron to afterwards because you could make that lay down a lot better than it's looking right there. But it's all quilted in place. It's not badly distorted. It's going to be nice and flat. I'm satisfied. That's a win. So thanks for joining me today. I'll be back tomorrow. We're just switching cameras. There we go. Thanks for joining. I'll be back tomorrow, approximately the same time. We'll aim for 9 o'clock. It's always a bit of a moving target by the time we get every camera and every feed and the mics and all that going, but we'll aim for about 9 o'clock. We'll be here and quilting again, working on, I think, a feather around the star and then into the background. So hope to see you then. Hope that you have a great rest of the day and chat with you tomorrow. Bye-bye.